Joining me right now for more on this is Asha Rangappa. She's a former FBI special agent and CNN legal and national security analyst. Shan Wu is here as well, CNN legal analyst and former federal prosecutor. Shan, let's just start right there with what Jessica was talking about. Is there another reason, and please tell me if there is, to reach out and discuss a possible pardon, is how it's termed, from the president's legal team if it is not to influence how someone would cooperate when an investigation is being built?
I would say no. I'm not sure what Mr. Giuliani and others might come up with, but I would say no, and more importantly, for any seasoned criminal defense attorney, much less someone like Giuliani, it would be obvious that you would not want to talk to any of those people, given who you are, about the possibility of a pardon, precisely to be wary of this kind of a take on it. So all the other talk about obstruction, it's very complex, of course. It gets into the unitary executive ability. Can the president really do something wrong if he's in charge of the executive branch? But actually, of all those theories, this type of communication about the pardon with these folks at that time, to me, is the closest to really making a criminal obstruction case. It would be very dependent upon the details of that communication, and I think it converts the president's legal team into witnesses.
That's a fascinating point that you raise. I want to get to the question of further on obstruction in just a second, Shan. But Asha, I do want to get your reaction when you heard Andrew McCabe, the former acting director of the FBI, say that he thinks that it is still possible that Donald Trump is a Russian asset.
Well, I think that he's articulating the basis on which the FBI opened a counterintelligence investigation, that they were very concerned that he might be compromised. I do think that it's important to clarify the terminology that McCabe used. You know, when we say asset, we are referring in the intelligence world to someone who is being actively directed and controlled by a foreign power, being tasked, perhaps being paid. And I think it's important to understand that someone does not have to be in that kind of fully conscious, witting position to still be acting in the interest of a foreign power and to be a threat to national security. So even if Trump is not an asset in the strict sense, but is overly influenced or motivated by desiring to please Putin for whatever reason over the interests of the United States, that would still be of interest to counterintelligence investigators and a potential threat to national security.
And that's a really interesting point, because Shan, as we all heard Andrew McCabe say that, it kind of dawns on you that if that was the case, if the president was and possibly is still, he believes, an asset of Russia, isn't that the definition of a national emergency? And I'm trying to not be so cute on this, but because isn't that something of a problem that this wasn't brought forward in the past 2 years if the FBI and the Justice Department thought that the president could be a Russian asset?
I think it absolutely is a moment of crisis. I think the atmosphere that we have heard about in those days, particularly after Comey firing, reflects that sense of crisis. I don't think it would have been prudent to be having Mueller or the Justice Department talking about that right now. I think they absolutely had to open the investigation. It placed those folks, the upper echelons, in a terribly difficult position. What do you do if the president is the suspect? I mean, you can't really go brief the president on it. So they had to move forward with the investigation. But speaking about it now, I mean, we don't know, what else they found. Presumably they moved forward with it. But talking about it too much now, that I think would be very improper on their part, because it's an explosive allegation. They unquestionably have a predicate to continue to investigate. But talking about it right now, they should keep quiet until they can make some progress on it.
And Asha, then this comes down to a renewed focus on McCabe again as well. I mean, he was determined to have misled or lied investigators at the FBI on 3 different occasions in an internal investigation about his role in speaking with the media about another investigation. Do you think his credibility should be in question here since he is trying to sell a book?
Well, I think we do have to take his credibility into account. I think that you know, I trust the systems that are in place internally, and if the IG report said that he lacked candor, then I think that that's something to be taken into account. I think the question here is what McCabe saying consistent with other behavior that we have seen in the public sphere on, you know, from Trump and with regard to his attitude and behavior towards Putin? And I have to look at his words in Helsinki, where he took the words of Putin over our intelligence assessment, his slow-rolling sanctions against Russia, his outrage that we expelled diplomats after the Salisbury poisoning. All of these things that are actually not normal behavior for an American president looking out for U.S. interests and acting on behalf of our allies. So in this instance, I would tend to credit McCabe's account of his concerns regarding the president's allegiances and loyalties and behavior.
And Shan, back to the conversations that the president had with the acting attorney general, Matt Whitaker, about trying to get the U.S. attorney in New York back on the Cohen case, even though he had recused himself for the reasons that Jessica Schneider had laid out. Where is the legal line of obstruction here?
Yeah, it's such a unique situation. So basically, Trump's trying to put his thumb on the scale a little bit. He's thinking that Berman's going to be friendly to him. Maybe he'll quash the investigation. That action reflects his fundamental misunderstanding of two things: recusal and human nature. So recusal, Berman, as a public official, he's saying, I'm conflicted. I have to recuse. I can't do an impartial job of prosecuting here. So no matter what Trump has Whitaker say, they can't change that. So it doesn't even make any sense. You can't force him to say, okay, I'm not unbiased. Second of all, the human nature aspect of it, that's a man who's worked his whole life to get to a pinnacle. He's going to be the United States Attorney for the Southern District of New York. He is not a lifelong lackey to the president. He doesn't owe him some loyalty. Now that he's gotten this position, he's got to throw out all his scruples just to satisfy the president. So the idea that something can be changed is silly to begin with. Is it a corrupt intent? Probably. Does that particular action rise to the level of corrupt intent the way intimidating a witness, telling a witness to change their story? Probably not. That's the factual gray area. And then there's the big legal gray area of whether or not a sitting president can ever obstruct something going on in his own Justice Department, something that I think Professor Dershowitz would argue is a physical impossibility.
And this could also come down to a question of what the incoming Attorney General, Bill Barr, would think about all that. And there's a big history of his thoughts on that one. It's good to see you guys. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.